So, I want to talk about an assassination which took place early in the morning on July 29th, 1900. And, if you know your history, you know that I'm talking about the assassination of the King of Italy, Umberto I, at the hands of a man named Gaetano Bresci. And I want to talk about it because I think it can give us a new perspective on recent events. I think it's good to learn from the past, and I think there is no understanding of the present unless we look at the past. So, let's begin. It was Italy in the late 1800s, particularly in the 1880s, and to put it lightly, Italy in the late 1800s was not doing too good. There was massive economic collapse, banks had to print illegal money and were shutting down within a few years. The people who relied on the banks, in other words the landowners and employers, went bankrupt and left many workers homeless and without a job. The government was failing, doing everything it could to restore a sense of honor to the monarchy, including going into war with Ethiopia and leaving thousands of Italians dead. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it is. It's the exact same situation in which we find ourselves today. Today, we have all of the same problems. We have economic collapse, inflation, rising prices, stagnating wages, and you know the rest. Homeless people still exist. The government is failing, is more or less a sentiment that everyone agrees on, and the United States engages in and supports wars that do nothing but harm the public, whether the American public or the public of some other country that it decided to rob of its independence. So, what happened? Well, the driving factor for the instability in Italy was the introduction of tariffs, which hopefully sounds familiar. At the time, Italy had to compete with countries that could produce and sell things for cheaper, so to try and bolster its own economy in things like sugar, wheat, and silk sales, the then Prime Minister, Francesco Crispi, introduced a general tariff or a tax on all imported goods in 1887. This tariff was increased 4 times in the following years, and by the end, in 1894, the tax on wheat was 5 times more than what it initially was. So, in response to the tax, and ultimately in response to all of the pressures of society put on them, they fought back. They went to the town halls, they committed arson, and they burned all of the tax records. Furthermore, they made peasant leagues, mutual aid societies, and political parties to demand for better conditions, such as a decrease in the price of wheat or a shortening of the workday. There was an entire wave of riots, strikes, and protests, and in 1894 there was even an insurrection in Lunigiana, in the northern part of the country. Now, of course, the government didn't respond too kindly to this kind of thing. In response to the 1894 revolt, over 10,000 people were exiled, many of whom had absolutely nothing to do with the riots. The government would have an even more violent response 4 years later, in 1898, when riots broke out in Milan to protest the wheat tax because 1898 was the year it was at its highest. The riots broke out on May 7th and May 10th, and in response, General Bava Bakaris declared martial law and had cannons shot at the protesters. The official reports from the time say that there were 80 dead and 450 wounded, numbers that scholars say are underestimated by at least 50%. And instead of the government condemning the killing of its own people, the King of Italy, Umberto I, gave the general a Medal of Honor and said that it was, quote, to reward the great service which you rendered to our institutions and to civilization, to attest to my affection and to the gratitude of myself and the country. And, if you know the rest of the story, on July 29th, 1900, a man named Gaetano Bresci shot King Umberto 4 times with a .32 caliber revolver. And upon being arrested, he said, "I did not intend to kill Umberto. I killed a king. I killed a principal." And as we all know, history has been repeated. Brian Thompson, CEO of United Healthcare, was shot 4 times outside of a New York hotel. The shooter, Luigi Mangione, in a notebook stated, and I quote, "The United States has the #1 most expensive healthcare system in the world, yet we rank roughly 42 in life expectancy. Frankly, these parasites simply had it coming." So, Luigi did not intend to kill a king. He intended to kill a principal. Now, in some ways, it seems that Luigi has had a better fate than Bresci. After the assassination, the crowd immediately tried to lynch him. There were masses all throughout the country to mourn the death of the king. One socialist journal even called him a criminal madman, and other people in Italy named Bresci report having to change their name in order to avoid being assaulted. However, in Luigi's case, he has been given over $100,000 in donations for legal support. Fellow prisoners have been heard saying "Free Luigi," and he has been touted as a kind of Robin Hood on social media. However, there are those who condemn Luigi, and by the same token, there were those who praised Bresci. The Italian Marxist Palmiro Togliatti said that Bresci symbolically took on the will of the people, and the Italian anarchist Luigi Galliani said that he was, quote, the sparkling archangel of popular revenge and social justice. One of the most notable anarchists in Italy, and arguably one of the most important anarchists in all of history, Enrico Malatesta, didn't praise Bresci, but at the same time, he didn't condemn him. He wrote a letter titled Causes and Effects, which might as well have been written yesterday. It starts, another act of bloodshed has come along to cast a pall over sensitive souls, and to remind the mighty that placing oneself above the people and riding roughshod over the great precept of equality and human solidarity is not without its risks. Gaetano Bresci, worker and anarchist, has killed Umberto the King. 2 men, one prematurely dead, the other condemned to a life of torments 1,000 times worse than death. 2 families plunged into grief. Who is to blame? That is the question on everyone's mind. Now, the news outlets have been clear in their answer. There has been no shortage of articles saying that Mr. Mangione was schizophrenic, narcissistic, that he was radicalized online, or whatever the case may be. They have also been quick to say anything to defame his character, such as that he was a very privileged man himself, or that he was not insured under United Healthcare. In the American coverage of the event, it's interesting to note that they have been concerned with covering the details of the case. They're constantly updating the news with new information as to where his fingerprints were found, what his travel route was, and so on. It's interesting, or it's ironic, because they have decried the cult of personality which is formed around him, but at the same time they actively support it by keeping the public's attention on him 24/7. There also seems to be an element of control or attempting to rein things in with recent news coverage. For example, in response to this event, BBC had a justice secretary on who talked about increase in prison funds and expanding the court system. Fox News had FBI agents talk about the case, and CNN has made multiple officials make public statements. In one, the District Attorney of New York, Alvin Bragg, said, "For whoever is celebrating this, just know that we will be vigilant and we will be ready." And recently, some politicians have also made public statements on this event. Donald Trump has called it a sickness, which is interesting because he is a staunch advocate of political violence whenever it benefits him. Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, has given a statement talking about how people are frustrated and angry at the US healthcare system, which I think misses the point a bit and doesn't really get to the heart of things. So let's go back to Malatesta's letter. First of all, let us bring things back into proportion. A king has been killed, and since a king is, for all that, still a man, that fact is to be deplored. A queen has been made a widow, and since a queen is, for all that, still a woman, she has our sympathy in her loss. But why all the brouhaha over the death of one man and over the tears of one woman, when the fact that so many men are being killed on a daily basis, and so many women left to weep because of wars, accidents at work, revolts crushed by gunshots, and thousands of crimes spawned by poverty, spirit of vengefulness, fanaticism, and alcoholism is accepted as natural? Why such an outpouring of sentimentality over one particular misfortune when thousands and millions of human beings are perishing of starvation and malaria to the indifference of those who might have the wherewithal to stop this? I think this is the question we must ask ourselves. Of course, Brian Thompson was the CEO of the most ruthless healthcare insurance company in the United States, a healthcare company that denied twice as many insurance claims as the average company and which faced constant legal scrutiny. But Brian Thompson is, for all that, still a man, and so the fact of his murder must be deplored. And his wife is, for all that, still a woman, and she has my sympathy in her loss. However, we have to be honest about things, because the fact is, while Brian Thompson and his family have received condolences from everyone who holds a public position, the American public has never been given any such sympathy. I do not need to give you the statistics because they are all too well known. Diabetics can't afford insulin. A significant portion of cancer patients skip and cancel appointment. People go to emergency rooms with fake names. Many become addicted to prescription drugs which were prescribed by their doctors, and tens of thousands of people die every year because of lack of health insurance. Yet through all of it, there has been no news coverage, no pile of articles, no public statements, and no funerals for any of them. So, we have to ask why. Why all the concern for the death of one man when millions of Americans are sent to die every day? Not only in healthcare, but Americans are sent to die through unsafe conditions at work, poverty, homelessness, and war, among other things. Maybe it's because this time, the death wasn't the death of another American destined to die, but the death of someone who has been granted the right to live. Though I do have sympathy for Brian Thompson as a man, I do not have the slightest sympathy for him in his role in maintaining the current order of things, and I recognize that in such a world, his death, or the death of some other big shot in the healthcare industry, was just a matter of time. So again, who is to blame? Let's go back to Malatesta's letter. Who is it that provokes the violence? Who is it that makes it necessary and inescapable? The entire established social order is founded upon brute force, harnessed for the purposes of a tiny minority that exploits and oppresses the vast majority. All of the education delivered to children boils down to an unrelenting paean to brute force. The whole atmosphere in which we live is an unbroken parade of violence, a continual incitement to violence. The soldier, which is to say the murderer by profession, is revered, and most revered of all is the king, whose most distinguishing feature historically has been that he commands soldiers. By brute force, the laborer is obliged to suffer the theft of the product of his labors. By brute force, weaker nations are robbed of their independence. Capitalists send workers to their deaths in the mines, on the railways, in the paddy fields. By refusing to make the necessary expenditure on safety at work, they summon in soldiers to intimidate and, if need be, gun down workers calling for better conditions. Again we ask, from whom, therefore, comes the incitement, the provocation to violence? Who is it that makes violence look like the only way out of the existing state of affairs, the only means whereby one may not be eternally subjected to the violence of others? Who is it that makes violence look like the only way out of the world we live in, when America is, by a million means, a continual incitement to violence? We're fired when we ask for better conditions at work, men are fired when they refuse to work ridiculous hours well beyond their contracts, and women are fired when they call out harassment at the hands of their bosses. The homeless are given nowhere to sleep but benches, and the city puts spikes on them. If they do find somewhere else, they are arrested. The American military sends people to die overseas, and if they come home, they are not given any help for the torture they've endured. From birth, we're expected to pledge allegiance to a country that sends bombs and drones everywhere it can and has a known history of destabilizing foreign governments. Police are quick to harass, mace, tase, arrest, and shoot anyone who challenges them, and many are on record saying that they take sadistic joy in doing so. We're taught since childhood to stay in abusive relationships with our families because they are, quote, our family. Landlords kick people out who can't afford rent and often do not care about the living conditions of their tenants, and so the list goes. So I think, if we're honest about things, it is not Luigi Mangione who incites violence, and it is not the healthcare industry, but it is American society as a whole. Our society has its bosses, landlords, policemen, jurors, district attorneys, congressmen, senators, and presidents, all of whom exploit the people for their own benefit. So long as society is based on violence, it will continue to create violence. And so long as they remain alive, not as people, but as concepts, there will be no end to the violence that they are so afraid of. As Malatesta said, we know that the essential act lies not in the physical killing of a king, but the killing of all kings, from courts, parliaments, and factories, in the hearts and minds of people. Of course, some people see things differently. Some people argue that Brian Thompson was just another man like any other who was trying to work and do his best in a broken system. This was the argument of BBC, which went through his old LinkedIn posts and found that he had actually talked about making healthcare more affordable. Malatesta. True, if factors such as heredity, education, ethos are taken into account, the personal responsibility of the mighty is greatly attenuated and may well evaporate altogether. But then, if the king is not answerable for his actions and his omissions, for the people being massacred in his name, and allegedly had to remain in the highest office in the land, why on earth should Bresci be held to account? Why on earth must Bresci pay with a lifetime of unspeakable suffering for one deed that, no matter how wrong-headed one might like to think it, no one can deny was prompted by altruistic intentions? Well, if that is the case, could not the same be said for Luigi? If Brian Thompson is not responsible for all those who have suffered under his name, then why on earth must Luigi be held to account? Why on earth must Luigi pay with a lifetime sentence in a maximum security prison for one deed that, no matter how wrong-headed one might like to think it, no one can deny was prompted by altruistic intentions? These were the last words of Malatesta's letter. If a bloody revolt by the victims is to be utterly ruled out, there is no course of action except the abolition of oppression by means of social justice. If eruptions are to be reduced and disarmed, there is no recourse other than to allow everybody freedom to propagandize and organize, for the disinherited, the oppressed, and the discontented to be left the option of civilized campaigning, for them to be afforded the hope that although piecemeal, they might secure their own emancipation by bloodless methods. The government of Italy will have none of this. It will carry on with its repression, and it will carry on reaping what it sows. While we deplore the short-sightedness of rulers who make the contest unnecessarily harsh, we shall carry on fighting for a society without violence, in which all will have bread, freedom, and science, and where love is the supreme law of existence. The same could be said for the United States. So long as it continues to revel in the exploitation of its population, it will continue reaping what it sows. So, this is the end of the video. Thanks for watching. This is my first time ever making a YouTube video, so I hope it turned out well. I write articles and I make music. That's what I spend most of my time doing. They are my passions. So I will put everything that I have made recently in the description, in a comment, or whatever. As far as my articles go, I wrote an article for Sabukaru on London's arcade scene. That is my pride and joy. And I wrote an article for Anime Feminists on the history of horror manga and its connection to Marxist politics, which I am also very proud of. As far as my music, I rap. I often rap at like jam sessions and ciphers and stuff. I don't have that much release music because I like going to ciphers. That's like my thing. But I do put up verses on TikTok and Instagram, so you can check me out there. I have some stuff up on YouTube, but like as far as rap goes, I treat YouTube as like my throwaway channel. Like that's just where I put like, that's like where I put B-side stuff. So check me out on TikTok and Instagram. Also, shout out to the anarchists in my city that told me that I shouldn't do something like this because I would be writing for the bourgeois press, and that instead I should write my ideas on newspapers and wheat paste them on train stations. I guess we all have to find our own way in life. But yeah, I hope this turned out well. I hope you have a good day. Hope you have a good holiday season. And if things go well, I'll see you again.